Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging into something really fundamental, how we actually figure things out. We're talking about the two main approaches to research, quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah, the big two. It sounds academic, but it really shapes how we understand almost everything reported around us.
Exactly. And our mission here is simple. Break down the research process, step by step. We want to show you how quantitative and qualitative methods look different at each stage.
From finding that initial question all the way to sharing the results.
Right. And understanding this stuff isn't just for researchers, it's actually crucial for you so you can interpret findings accurately, become a smarter consumer of information, which, let's face it, we're swimming in data these days.
Absolutely. It helps you ask, okay, where did this number come from? Or what's the story behind this claim?
So by the end of this, you'll have a much clearer grasp, we hope, of how researchers ask questions, how they gather data, how they make sense of it all, whether it's through crunching numbers or exploring stories.
Should be interesting.
Okay, let's dive in. Every deep dive, every piece of research, it starts with a problem, right? That initial itch, that question. But how do quantitative and qualitative researchers actually pinpoint the problem they want to tackle? It seems like they'd start differently.
Oh, they absolutely do. And that starting point, that research problem, it kind of sets the entire trajectory. It dictates everything that follows.
How so?
Well, for you as someone looking at research, it immediately tells you if the study is aiming to measure, like, how much or how many.
The numbers bit.
Yeah, the quantifiable stuff. Or is it trying to understand how it feels or what it's like from someone's perspective? And honestly, you'd be surprised how often those get mixed up, people trying to answer a feeling question with only numbers.
That's a really critical distinction.
Yeah.
So on the quantitative side, it's more about description and explanation.
Exactly. They want to quantify relationships, figure out how common something is, maybe even pin down cause and effect.
So the problem itself has to be like really well defined,
Hmm.
testable.
Precisely. Testable is key. And they justify it by looking at existing theories or past research or maybe a practical issue, and they say, look, there's a gap here we can measure, or this has real-world implications we need to quantify.
Okay, give us an example, like the screen time thing with teenagers.
Perfect example. A quantitative researcher sees studies showing some link between screen time and grades, but maybe the results are messy or the extent isn't clear.
Right.
So their problem becomes we need to quantify the specific relationship between, say, daily hours on social media versus gaming versus educational apps and objective things like GPA or test scores. They want a number on it, usually in a big sample.
Okay, makes sense. So what about qualitative then? How do they frame their problem?
Qualitative is much more exploratory, more about understanding. They're diving into phenomena to grasp experiences, different perspectives, the meanings people attach to things, all from the participant's point of view.
So the problem might not be as rigid from the start.
Exactly. Sometimes it emerges more organically from just observing or initial conversations. The justification isn't about filling a specific numerical gap, but about the need for a deeper, more nuanced understanding where numbers just don't tell the whole story.
Ah, highlighting what we don't know on a deeper level.
Precisely. So, sticking with screen time, a quantitative study measures the hours, right? But a qualitative one asks, well, what's the actual nature of these online experiences? How do the teens themselves perceive this influencing their learning? How do they navigate Instagram versus Khan Academy? What does it mean to them?
It's peeling back the layers, like you said, getting the story behind the statistic.
You got it.
Fascinating. So the question itself really does set the path. Okay, once you've got that problem, that focus, the next step is usually looking at what's already known, right? The literature review. But you're saying that plays out differently too.
Totally different rules, yeah. And this is another flag for you, the listener. When you see how much emphasis is put on the lit review, it tells you something. Are you looking at research that's carefully building on a huge pile of existing data?
Brick by brick.
Yeah. Or is it something trying to break new ground, maybe exploring something messy and human that hasn't really been mapped out yet?
Okay, so for quantitative, the lit review is big.
Oh, it's major, extensive, comprehensive. It's not just background reading. It's used to pinpoint those exact gaps we talked about, define the key variables very precisely, formulate specific testable hypotheses, and basically guide the whole study design.
It's the bedrock.
Absolutely. It provides that strong empirical foundation. So for screen time, that extensive review might find, okay, lots of studies, but the results are all over the place. Some find negative links, some find none, some even find positive links for educational stuff.
Right, inconsistent.
And maybe they notice that most studies lump all screen time together, so the lit review justifies their specific problem. Look, nobody's properly measured the impact of different types of screen time consistently. We need to do that. It directly supports the why.
Got it. So, qualitative lit review, less intense.
Often, yes, especially at the start. Remember, the main goal is to capture the participant's perspective without too many preconceived ideas from existing literature, potentially clouding things.
So you don't want to go in expecting to find certain things based on old studies.
Exactly. The review might be used more to find, say, a broad theoretical lens or understand the historical context. But its main job in the justification is just to frame the general area and argue why this deeper dive is needed, maybe because previous work, often quantitative, just hasn't captured the lived reality or the complexity.
Like saying, we know the numbers, but we don't know the experience.
Precisely. For screen time, the review might say, look, lots on hours spent, very little on the internal experience or how teens interpret the meaning of being online for their schoolwork, so it justifies that deep qualitative exploration.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Problem identified, literature reviewed. Now you state your purpose, your mission statement for this specific study. And you said earlier, this is where the paths really diverge.
They really do. And that purpose statement, it's like the abstract for the approach. It tells you straight up. Are we trying to nail down a relationship with numbers, or are we trying to, understand the rich, complex reality of an experience?
So quantitative purpose statement. Think specific, narrow.
Very specific. It'll name the variables, the things being measured, it'll name the population who's being studied, and it'll state the exact relationship they're investigating. The whole point is usually to test a specific hypothesis.
And the data has to be.
Measurable, observable, objective. Stuff you can count or rate reliably.
So, back to our trusty screen time example. A quantitative purpose might sound like
Something like, the purpose of this quantitative study is to examine the relationship between daily hours of social media use, hours of educational app usage, and grade point average, or GPA, among 300 high school students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. See? Very precise variables, population, relationships.
crystal clear. Okay, contrast that with qualitative.
Qualitative purpose, think general, broad. It states an intent to explore or understand or describe a phenomenon, usually from the participant's viewpoint. It's about uncovering insights, not testing something predefined.
And the focus is on.
Subjective stuff, lived experiences, perceptions, meanings, interpretations, the messy human side of things.
So, same topic, qualitative purpose.
It might be. The purpose of this qualitative study is to explore and understand the lived experiences of high school students regarding how they perceive their engagement with digital media to influence their academic learning and engagement. Much broader, focused on perception and experience.
Explore and understand versus examine relationship. Big difference. All right, purpose set. Now, the really practical bit. Collecting the data, getting the actual information. How does that differ?
This is where you really see the philosophical differences in action. What do they value most? Breadth or depth?
What do you mean?
Well, quantitative wants breadth, lots of people, so they can hopefully generalize the findings. Qualitative wants depth, really rich, detailed understanding from fewer people, and thinking about which one you find more compelling in a given situation is useful for you, the listener.
Okay, so quantitative data collection sounds like surveys and tests.
Pretty much. They use predetermined standardized instruments, things like surveys with multiple choice or a Chart scale question.
Where you rate things like strongly agree to strongly disagree.
Exactly, or standardized tests, maybe checklists. The key is that the tools are fixed beforehand to ensure everyone is measured the same way. Objective measurement.
And the data is always numbers.
Numeric data, yeah. Things you can count or statistically analyze. And like I said, they need large sample sizes, lots of individuals for statistical power, and to make those generalizations.
So for screen time, maybe an online survey to hundreds of students.
Yep. A self-administered questionnaire for, say, 300 students. Ask about demographics, use those Likert scales for frequency of social media use, educational app use, and then get their official GPAs. And importantly, those survey questions would be pilot tested first to make sure they're clear and reliable.
Right, standardized. Okay, flip side, qualitative data collection. Sounds more flexible.
Much more flexible. The instruments are often just protocols, guides for interaction, and they can evolve during the research. The researcher might start broad and get more specific as they learn.
So what tools do they use?
Things like open-ended interviews where you can really probe and follow up, focus groups where people discuss things together, direct observation, just watching what happens in a natural setting or analyzing documents, photos, videos.
And the data isn't numbers.
Nope. It's usually text like interview transcripts, detailed field notes from observations or images, things that capture richness and nuance.
And fewer people involved.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Small sample sizes, maybe interviewing 15 students instead of surveying 300. They prioritize depth over breadth, often selecting participants purposively because they have specific experiences relevant to the question.
So for screen time, maybe in-depth interviews.
Exactly. Semi-structured interviews with maybe 15 teens. The interview guide might start broad. Tell me about your digital life, and then narrow down based on what the student says, probing into impacts on motivation, how they use tools for homework, etc. And you'd audio record and transcribe everything verbatim.
Word for word. Wow. Okay, so you've got this pile of numbers or this mountain of text. Now you have to make sense of it all. The analysis phase.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because one gives you the stats, the significance, the how much.
The quantitative.
Right. And the other gives you the stories, the themes, the what it's like.
Qualitative.
Yeah. And the key thing to realize is neither one gives you the whole picture on its own. They really complement each other. Understanding that is, well, it's super valuable.
Okay, let's break it down. Quantitative analysis first. What does that look like?
It's all about statistics.
Mhm.
You start with descriptive statistics, things like calculating the average screen time, the average GPA, how many students fall into different categories, just describing your sample.
Summarizing the data.
Exactly. Then you move to inferential statistics. That's where you try to draw conclusions beyond just your sample. Things like correlation, does social media time go up as GPA goes down? Or regression analysis, can we predict GPA based on hours spent on educational apps?
Trying to find relationships and make predictions.
Right. The goal is to describe trends, compare different groups, see if the relationships between your variables are statistically significant, meaning unlikely to be just due to chance.
And then you interpret those stats.
You compare your results to what you initially predicted, based on your hypothesis in the literature review. Does the data support the theory? Does it contradict it? What are the new insights?
So for screen time, you'd run the numbers.
You'd calculate average hours, average GPA, run a correlation, maybe find, say, a moderately negative correlation between social media use and GPA, like R equals 0.45, and it's statistically significant, P 0.001. Maybe a small positive one for educational apps.
Okay.
Then maybe a multiple regression shows that social media use explains, 20% of the variance in GPA. So your interpretation supports the idea that, yeah, high social media use seems detrimental, while educational apps might have a slight benefit.
Based purely on the number.
Okay.
Qualitative analysis sounds totally different. No stats.
Generally, no. It's usually about text analysis. The most common approach is probably thematic analysis.
Thematic analysis.
Yeah, you systematically read through all that text, the interview transcripts, the field notes over and over. You start identifying recurring ideas, concepts, patterns. You code the data.
Like tagging bits of text?
Kind of, yeah. Then you group related codes together to form broader themes. The purpose is description, analysis, and interpreting the meaning woven through those themes.
So you're looking for the big ideas that keep coming up in what people said.
Exactly. And the interpretation isn't just listing the themes, it's about making sense of them. What do these themes tell us about the participants' experiences in their context? What are the deeper meanings? How does it connect to the bigger picture?
So, for the screen time interviews,
You'd read all 15 transcripts. Maybe codes like can't focus, FOMO, connecting with friends, finding answers fast, feeling drained start popping up.
okay.
You group these into themes, like maybe distraction and procrastination, social connection and validation, resource for learning, and digital well-being concerns.
Oh, okay.
Then the interpretation digs into that. You might conclude that adolescents see digital media as a real double-edged sword. It distracts them, but it's also vital for social connection and quick information. It gives you that nuanced understanding, the complexity that the numbers alone might miss.
That's fascinating. Two very different ways to arrive at insights on the same topic. Okay, last step. Reporting and evaluating the research. Sharing it with the world. Does that look different too?
Oh, absolutely. And how it's reported and judged goes right back to those initial goals we talked about.
Wow.
Understanding this helps you, the reader, critique it properly. You need to know, am I judging this based on numerical rigor or on the depth of its insight? People often apply the wrong yardstick.
Good point. So, quantitative reporting. Sounds like lab reports. Structured.
Very standard, very fixed structure. Usually follows something like APA-style introduction, methods, results, discussion, lots of tables, graphs, summaries of the statistical findings.
And the tone.
Objective, unbiased, or at least aiming for that. The focus is squarely on the statistical evidence. Personal interpretations are generally avoided in the results section.
And how do you evaluate if it's a good quantitative study?
You look at the statistical rigor. Was the analysis appropriate? Was the sample size large enough? Were the measurement tools reliable and valid? Did they actually measure what they claimed to measure? Is the argument logical?
So that screen time study would end up as a journal article, very formal, lots of stats in the results, discussion comparing findings to hypotheses.
Exactly. Clear, structured, evidence-based in a numerical sense.
Okay. Qualitative reporting then. More like storytelling.
It can be, yeah. It's much more flexible, often more narrative and descriptive. You'll see researchers weaving in direct quotes from participants, providing rich descriptions of the context, really trying to bring the themes to life.
So less structured.
Less rigidly structured, definitely. The tone is often more reflexive. The researcher might explicitly acknowledge their own perspective or potential biases, not as a flaw, but as part of the context. Transparency is key.
Interesting. And evaluation. How do you judge qualitative work?
You're looking for different things. Depth and richness of the data, did they really capture the complexity? Rigor of the analysis, how clearly did they develop the themes? Is the process transparent? Credibility, do the findings resonate with the participants or other experts? Transferability, are the insights potentially useful in other similar contexts?
So that qualitative screen time study might be reported using lots of direct quotes to illustrate themes like double-edged sword, maybe in a paper or even a book chapter.
Precisely. With a discussion section that's more interpretive, exploring the nuances, the implications, maybe even the researcher's own reflections on the process, it's about building a compelling, trustworthy, insightful account based on those experiences.
Wow. Okay, so we've really walked through the whole process, haven't we? From finding that first question to writing the final report and seeing how these two paths, quantitative and qualitative, they really do offer different ways of knowing.
Different, but both incredibly valuable ways to understand the world.
Absolutely. So maybe the takeaway for you listening is this. Next time you read a study or see a headline based on research, pause for a second. Ask yourself, was this designed to tell me how much? Or was it designed to tell me how it feels?
Or maybe even, how well did it achieve that specific goal?
Good point. And think about what kind of understanding you were actually looking for in that moment. Are you after the big picture stats or the deep personal insight?
Knowing the difference really empowers you to engage with information more critically.
We really hope this deep dive helps you appreciate the amazing variety and, yes, the rigor behind all the facts and stories you encounter. Keep learning, everyone.
And keep asking questions.